on green budgeting. We'll try to cover quite the most important aspects of it, but this will be obviously quick. There will be time for questions, so feel free to note them or send them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them in the time saved for that. And there will be, we will be available anyway afterwards for any follow-up questions by me. Maybe some just quick words. The agenda first. So that's a bit more refined version of the agenda. So first we'll go through the first concept of green budget. Why is it? Why doing it? Make sure we are on the same page on definitions and some key principles of these tools. And then the second part will be more devoted to practical feedback and cases. We'll be diving a lot into French examples. That's because that's the ones we've been part of, but we could extend if there's any questions. The experience is a bit larger than that. And then we will end with a part about how green budgeting tools or green tagging inserts into a wider frame for actually green budgeting in the wider sense for finance ministers. Maybe a quick word on us. So we are a research institute based in Paris. Most of us work actually in France. Part of the team is devoted to international topics. I'm here on behalf of the international team, and Marion works a lot with local governments. So between us, we've covered very different geographies with green budgeting. Happy to share with that. That I won't enter into the detail, but green budgeting is part of our work, which has a lot to do with public finance. There's also work on tax and carbon markets, which is closely linked to this work. And then work goes on public banks, financial regulations, which is a bit further away. Investment is really close as well, because we will see in the end of the presentation how green budgeting connects with investment planning and attracting investments more generally. So diving without further ado in the first part of this presentation. So I'll start with a French example because that for us is useful in setting the why we do it. So in France, the whole green budgeting, green budget tagging thing started like 20 years ago, basically, with the first time the parliament asked for a report to be able to understand the effort of the government on environmental issues. So that was the first point in time report at this time, followed by in 2008 by a report more specifically on energy transition, which was like a more focused issue in the context of heavy state subsidies to renewables. And at the time, the idea was still to inform specifically members of parliament on the effort of the state. Then the budget tagging trajectory starts to intertwine with carbon tax considerations in France. Carbon tax in France was passed in 2013 and was increased following the Paris Agreement in 2015. And then we start seeing the first discussions on how to use the proceeds of the tax. That was not an easy discussion. I'll make it short, but that wasn't an easy discussion in France because of the setting of the tax, which was embedded into a wider energy tax. So it was really difficult to understand which part of the proceeds were actually due to carbon tax and which were linked to a more generic part of the tax. And then the energy tax, the whole proceeds were used in three different funds. One was the general budget, and the other two were like specific accounts devoted to either the energy transition or funding for other aspects of climate transition. So really hard to understand where the money went. And that proved an issue, actually. In 2018, we got these huge protests of the Yellow Vests. And basically, one of the routes, I mean, there were several routes, but one of them was that people just became aware that the carbon tax existed, because before that, each time the tax rate increased, that was basically connected to a drop in fuel prices. So people didn't see the price changes. But at this time, the price started to rise again, and people became aware that in the meantime, a huge tax has been passed, and they started to ask, where did the money of this tax go? And nobody was able to answer this question. So the answer to the green budgeting as it stands in France now was actually an answer to this yellow vest protest. The idea was to say, okay, we're not able at all to take a small part of our tax proceeds and say where it goes. What we can do is to tag the whole budget and say, okay, this part is linked to climate, and the carbon tax is part of this whole effort. But we are not only tagging the effort, we are tagging everything that is related to climate. So that was the first route for France of the yellow vest, of the green tagging. It was citizen demand and the fact that you couldn't track a specific tax. Then the first exercise was published in 2019, and in 2020, as you are all aware, I guess, COVID struck all of the world, but France especially. In France, we had this huge post-COVID recovery plan, where there was a strong national commitment to invest, to make it a green recovery plan. And there was very little time to do that. That was a very complex plan, obviously, with a huge number of billions of fresh money to spend and to allocate. So the government needed a tool to be able to allocate very quickly money and be sure that this money wouldn't be invested in anything that was harmful to climate action. And the green budget that was out at this very time proved a useful tool for that. That was one of the tools that helped make quick decisions in a very specific budgetary context. And here we're moving to a new use that wasn't the intended use of this tool at first, which was really to steer budget decisions in a very short time frame. So it proved its usefulness and then was implemented and is now part of the whole budget process. Budget tagging report, green budget tagging report is published every year as part of the budget bill background documents in September. So, and then given the success at national level of this process, France passed a circular to make it mandatory as well for local governments, but Marlon will be able to expand on that to make this same kind of exercises that will be then useful for them to ask for, to discuss their subsidies and funds allocation with the national government. What to take out of that is that the French example actually is just a synthesis of what we can see, what we've seen in every country in the world. We've been doing a huge review of who does budget tagging. And we found two main reasons for that. The first one is to showcase or make transparency over the national effort towards climate change. So this could be two different reasons. One is to facilitate access to external funding. Basically in the countries, mostly in the countries we've reviewed, it would be to facilitate discussions with donors. And the second reason is to reveal the extent of the climate and budget links, and that's more internal and domestic issues, answering citizens' demand, as in the case of France. We've seen a lot of citizens' climate budgets, either to answer a specific request or because the state wanted to display the extent of its own effort towards citizens and taxpayers. So that's the first big category of objectives for green budgeting. The second one that emerged in our case, our French example with COVID, is to steer budgetary decisions. In many countries, it states the goal of we've been reviewing the goals stated by countries for putting up green budget tagging, and in many cases it has to do with ensuring the consistency of budgets across ministries, because climate is such a transversal issue that at some point many countries came up to grip with the fact that they weren't able, and I mean, administrations first and member of parliament then weren't able to connect climate action through the government action as a whole. And that led to inconsistencies and ineffectiveness. In some cases, harmful subsidies were given for very good like competitiveness or social reasons, but were detrimental to climate action. And at the same time, direct state money was spent to undo the harmful effect of these subsidies from the perspective of climate action. So that's basically bad use of inefficient use, at least, of public money. So green budgets were really useful in being able to pinpoint these cases and trade-off between different sets of policies and improve overall consistency. Yeah, I'll come back to that, but the idea is that there must be a reason why this exercise is undertook, because that's a huge administrative effort, and it has great outcomes, and it is really useful, but it has to be sure that there is a reason why, and just not do it. We've seen a lot of countries where this exercise was imposed or paid for by donors, but then wasn't used by anyone, and it stopped after a few years because the national context wasn't right for using the results that came out of this exercise. Okay, so that's one example why it worked actually pretty well. Indonesia has been doing that for more than 15 years now, and they use their green budgeting to attract to back their green bond emissions with the green budget as a reporting scheme on where the money from the green bonds themselves are being used, is being used. Maybe a quick word, and then I'll let Marion on the next part. I foresee, so I've mentioned a review of international practices. Actually, what we've done and what we can talk about is that we developed the first French prototype. We also developed the methodology for local governments in France. We conducted this review of international practices on which we based training for 20 plus European member states. This is an extract, actually. Most of what you'll see today is an extract of this 5 days training. We developed tools that I'll be talking about on linking climate and social considerations. And then we developed a whole stream of work on local governments that Marion will be able to talk a bit more about. Marion, maybe over to you here.
Thank you, Sebastian. So I will develop a bit more about the principles and methodology and what is budget tagging and what is not. So if we look at green budget tagging, so is there a definition, a common definition? So we looked at the French budget, the French green budget, and there is the following definition. So to identify the elements in the state's budget that influence national emissions, to increase national emission or to reduce them. And the green budget is to quantify the associated monetary volumes to these elements and to categorize these measures according to their impact in terms of alignment with the national commitments and emission trajectory. So to categorize them as they are favorable or unfavorable to the national climate strategy of France. Here is just an example of what you can find in the green budget for France. Since 2020, the French government is doing their own analysis of their expenditures. And on the left side, you can see the analysis for 2024 expenditures. And on the right side, you can see that they how they measure the improvements along the year and how they measure the effort that they are trying to do to make their budget greener. Here is another example. So as Sebastian said, we worked with subnational governments at I4C, and we construct with them a green budgeting method adapted to local context. And with this working group, we made some recommendation to develop a green budget at the local level. And to show the results from green budgeting, we recommend to present the results by subcommittees. So for example, here, this is a fictional example, and it shows how it can be shown for the transport committee and how to present the result from green budgeting to elected officials. We suggest also to separate the environmental impacts into distinct categories. So as you can see on the left, up left, the impact on carbon neutrality and the impact on adaptation. And it is possible also to measure the impact on other environmental impact like biodiversity, for instance. But we advise against aggregating these criteria because otherwise you cannot know anymore what expenditure has an impact on what impact. So to be clearer, we recommend to separate the impact on each axis that you will analyze. And last, yes, thanks, Sebastian. And last, we recommend to highlight also the climate action that is undertaken by the subnational government, because there are brown expenditure in your budget. This is normal, I would say. But the subnational government might already be implementing or planning actions to mitigate this impact. So that's why we recommend to present the climate actions or the action that you are taking, that you are making. And another question is, what is not a green budget? What is not green budgeting tagging? So it can be confused with what is called a carbon budget. So a carbon budget sets a ceiling on CO2 emissions. So it is expressed in CO2 emission and not in euro as a green budget is. And a carbon budget helps to determine a strategy to reduce your emissions. Generally, it is broken down by sector. And it is often linked to a climate plan to know how to reduce your emissions. A green budget is also not a greenhouse gas inventory. So it is also expressed in terms of CO2. And a GHG inventory provides a snapshot, a photography of your emissions at a specific point of time. And finally, it is not neither a budgeting of your climate action plan. It does not calculate the cost of your climate action plan. This is a crucial aspect, and we will discuss this later in the presentation. To provide you a broader overview of other existing tools that are commonly under the umbrella of green budgeting, other international organizations have developed this. So for instance, the OECD has compiled a list of tools here in this table. So I won't go into details on all of them, but you can see 3 of them that are related to green budget tagging. And another international organization that has introduced green budgeting into its practices is PEFA. PEFA stands for Public Expenditures and Financial Accountability. And it supports governments in assessing their public financial management processes. And they developed a specific framework on climate and public finances. And there are, as you can see, various indicators for this assessment. And the second indicator is tracking climate-related expenditure. So it refers to green budget tagging. Mexico and the national government in Mexico have been using this PEFA assessment, so it can provide you interesting example if you want to refer to them. And yeah, the Helsinki principle is another thing that might be of interest for you, because as you know, the finance ministries of the G20 countries have agreed on 6 principles known as the Helsinki principles. And the fourth principle, mainstream, calls for integrating climate change into budgeting, into public investment management, and in procurement. So green budgeting can be a tool that can support this principle. So this is a map of what has been done in the world about green budgeting. So green budgeting began in Asia in 2008, so very early, and it was with the support of the United Nations. And then you can see on the map that it spread a long time, and some exercise were a one-shot exercise. So this is the one in orange, and other exercise have been became recurring practices, and they have been conducted more to guide the transition for the government rather than to meet funders' requirement. The subnational government cannot be visible on this map, but we know, of course, that many of them are already involved in such exercises. Some of you are, and some other are. So yeah, this is just a snapshot of the national government. And many supporting actors are interested in green budgeting. Some of them have developed frameworks, some of them have developed references that can be very interesting to you, so don't hesitate to go to their website. And for instance, the Pacific Island, they have developed an expertise on adaptation because, as you know, they are particularly concerned by adaptation, so that might be useful for you as well. And I head up to you, Sebastian, for the methodological choices. Your mic is off.
Sorry. Thanks, Marion. So now on methodological choices, back to motivations for climate budget tagging, and actually back mostly to this comment of the goals. What we'll be commenting here is how to more than very technical choices that you will be discussing in other modules for this presentation. What we've tried to highlight in our research is what makes an exercise fit for a purpose or another, what makes an exercise, what is it that what are the conditions for an exercise to be used and not to just stay as a very good administrative report in a drawer. So we've isolated, there's several actually huge frameworks of how to progress in green budgeting. We put here one, which is the European framework that uses 5 axes to rank the ambition of a green budget exercise, which you can see on the left: the coverage, the methodology, the deliverables, the governance, the transparency efforts, and then it goes from beginners or starting level to advanced level of green budgeting. You have the advanced level on the right, and then there's, plenty of staged steps that you can take to start slow and small on green budget tagging, and then improve and extend and expand the ambition and the breadth of the exercise. But in the end, apart from this technical aspects of the exercise, it all boils down for us to 5 key methodological choices that will define what the exercise will look like in the end and what it will be useful for. The first one is the dimensions of environmental action. That's related to, I mean, that the most ambitious exercise we see now embark 5 dimensions of environmental action at the same time. I've put them here, like climate change mitigation, adaptation, water management, circular economy and waste, pollution, and biodiversity. And these kind of exercises are really useful to bring up trade-offs between different dimensions of environmental action. That's, I was mentioning at the beginning, the interest of these kind of exercises to improve consistency. Exercises that want to steer public finance will embark several dimensions to enable this kind of trade-offs and to make them visible. Exercises that want to report on climate don't necessarily need the whole package, because that's a lot of information to get by to go through water management if you only want to report on climate mitigation and or adaptation. A second aspect that is to us key to the ambition of the exercise and the use of the exercise is the inclusion or not of revenues, tax expenditures, and also state-owned enterprises, the scope of the exercises. Again, is if the aim is only to report on how the state uses this money, its money, or the government uses its money, it's not necessary to go beyond state expenditure or government expenditure. On the contrary, if the idea is to steer and to make to strive for efficiency of climate action, then you need to look at taxes and tax exemptions. The example I've put here is from the French exercises that we did actually some years back. And the size of the square is actually the monetary amount of identified measures. So basically what this picture tells is that taxes, in terms of amount, taxes related to climate are as significant as expenditure and tax exemptions put together. And tax exemptions are roughly the same amount as direct expenditures. And as you can see, not the same color at all. So that's something you might want to consider in light of what you want to do with your exercise. That's some additional work, but it's also additional reward on the work. And yeah, the last point is about how you tag actually the diverse shades of green that you can use. I've put here in the example 3 shades of green, and that's important information again in how to make expenditure efficient. The greenest one of them, the level 3 here, is what would appear in any exercise that would tag based on what is the explicit intent of the state. It's expenditure that has been put forward for a climate purpose and is actually efficient at that. And then, oops, sorry, I had a, yeah, okay. I had a slide here. And then you can go into detail. There's usually a different way to approach the rest of the grades and the less green grades. But what is important to make appear is obviously all the expenditure that has a positive climate impact, and even if it wasn't intended for climate reasons, like, I don't know, home insulation that could be more for fighting energy poverty issues, but also has direct impacts for climate. But then what is also interesting to flag is expenditure that might have climate intent to do in the short or longer term, but has serious chances to prove a dead end. Sorry, like following up with the French example, we had this all like these gas buses or gas cars, for example, in France. Gas cars, we know by our long-term strategy that there won't be enough renewable gas for everyone. So we know that the French long-term strategy allocates what we are able to produce in the long term in gas to freight trucks and possibly rail transportation. So anything that would consume gas, like private cars or light freight vehicles, are definitely not able. I mean, would be diving into the same limited resources as freight trucks on train and make them unsustainable. So investing right now in schemes that would promote gas cars are lowering the emissions of the whole car fleet today, but in the long run, they're actually proving an issue because we're investing in dead ends. And then what is also important to mention is what is not defined. Some very generic support for economic activities or paying for teachers or justice or is activity that is in some cases, well, teachers and justice not, but research, for example, may have impact, which is very difficult to qualify. So being able to pinpoint part of the budget that has climate impacts, but is not really defined and is difficult is hard to qualify is also something important to point out. And then comes the last one, the harmful expenditure. Again, this doesn't make sense in a setting where the idea is to just report on national or government effort towards climate. But usually nobody like spend money just for the purpose of harming the climate. So there's a reason for that, and being able to highlight this expenditure is also a way to then trade off between reducing it or offsetting it, because in the long run, if we want to be serious about being net zero, we'll have to recognize that some emissions will stay, because like in state budgets, you've got like, I don't know, you've got the planes for the army, for example, that will stay. Especially now, this will stay. But we have to offset that because it's not compatible with the net zero. So being able to highlight and isolate this kind of spendings is also the first step towards offsetting them. And the last one, no, sorry, there's one left after this one, but it's also about dealing with quantitative coefficients. You see a lot of exercises that will use quantitative coefficient to say, okay, 100% of this expenditure is actually related to climate, 40% is contributing to the climate effort. Again, this is an exercise that should be considered carefully. It could be useful, especially in reporting a global effort, because it allows ending up with an aggregated number, an aggregated figure of the total amount of climate efforts. But in the case of being able to discuss the relevance of a budget line, it's probably damaging. It's a lot of effort to put a number, and usually by people that are either not familiar with the expenditure itself or with how to tag it from the climate perspective or from the water management perspective. And it won't help trade-off between this expenditure and another one. So that's something that's additional effort that should be considered in the light of will it be useful or not. And yeah, the last one is the use of taxonomies. There's now a lot, and more and more emerging taxonomies of sustainable, green, climate-related, and so on activities that are used for private investment, that are used for green bonds emission, that are used for a number of purposes. This is obviously a huge help to build climate tagging for a given government, but it could also twist a bit the intent of the exercise because this is obviously linked to a specific context and might not fit the goal of a given state. For example, for France, when they built their national budget tagging exercise, they used the European Commission framework or taxonomy for sustainable activities, but they twisted it to make sure that it would reflect their own national objectives as set in the long-term national strategy. And that's what it is about in the end. I mean, again, we're faced with the dichotomy between if you want to report on your efforts, maybe you want to use an international standard because that's the way you will make it understandable for people that are outside your own country or jurisdiction. But if you want to make sure that you're consistent between budget allocation decisions and long-term climate and environmental objectives, you want to make sure that your tagging takes in these national specificities that you have and that you adapt taxonomies accordingly. Maybe one last slide and I will pass it on back to Marion. So just to mention also that depending on the objective you have, a tagging exercise can take place at different stages of the budget cycle. In some cases, it will be published as in the French case I was mentioning as a background document to the budget bill because you want that the MPs will be the first or any elected officials will be the first audience for this report, and that brings compromises because you will the data for the new budget will only be out very fresh. So you'll have to either process the budget bill very quickly to produce this background document or use the data from the year before. So that's training off between the impact through the audience you want to reach and the quality of the data you will be able to use, and or putting a strain on your administrative capacities. Or you could choose to use executed budget data, which obviously is not a real-time decision-making, so will not be of much use for any assembly or decision makers in the very short political cycle, but could also could instead help improve, like for example, some analytics linked to execution. How do you say that? Execution rates on green budget, and making sure that all the money that is committed towards or related to climate is actually spent. And that's something that has been used. I've shown before the example of Indonesia on their green bonds. In their case, green budget was here to make sure that everything that was committed for climate purposes was actually used for this purpose. And there's a lot of other cases, but I'm seeing the time and I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Jessica. So we wanted to show you an example. So we work with different subnational governments in France, and especially we work with Paris. So I will present what they have done and how they have done it and what they want to do now with this green budgeting assessment. So first of all, Paris has an ambitious climate strategy. They want to become neutral by 2050, and they have just voted their new action plan this year. So it will start. It has just started. And in this climate action plan, they commit to implementing their green budget. So they have developed a method with us, but they choose some methodological choices. So regarding the scope, what they analyze is the main budget, the general budget, and they analyze operating expenditures and investment expenditures. They analyze the actual expenditure. So not the projected budget, but what has been done, what has been really done. Also, they define a thresholds. So all expenditures that are above 1 million euros are considered, and they consider only mitigation at this stage. But they are really interested in developing the analysis in adaptation and in biodiversity to have a broader approach. So about the governance, who is involved? So initially, as Sebastian mentioned, there were a task force, a special team that was established with staff from the environment department and from the finance department. And this little team collaborates with the operational department, and they gather information of their expenditures, so non-financial complementary data they needed to do the analysis. And in total, so one person in Paris is fully dedicated to this analysis, but this person does not do only the green budgeting. This person is also here to help the operational directorate, the operational departments to improve their expenditures, to know better what are the negative impacts of their expenditures and find ways to mitigate this. So how Paris introduced green budgeting in their budgetary calendar. So first, they do their assessment of the actual expenditure of the previous year, then in February. And to do that, they have the help of the budget analysis and the help from the finance team. And they will get the results in April. And this result will be communicated in June, because in June the actual expenditures are voted by the city council. So and they choose to do it on the actual expenditure because they wanted to repoliticize the vote of the actual expenditures. So to give place for debates between elected officials on the climate improvement and the climate categorization of expenditures. And yeah, maybe just one more thing on the previous slide. As you can see, they want to develop the methodology, and so they have time to do it between two exercises, and especially about the automatization of the analysis, how they can get further to have more time to focus on the hard question and more time to focus on developing adaptation method, for instance. Yes, this slide is just an illustration of the result that they get. So for 2023, I won't go further on that. And the next slide shows the progress that they have done since 2020, so on investment and on operating costs. In red, you can see the harmful investment and the harmful operating expenditure that they have. And in what is in white is what they cannot categorize for the moment because they don't have sufficient data to categorize them. This is just for you to know that they also communicate. So as we said, into the actual expenditure report, but also in other reports that are more made for the public, for the citizens, like the Bloc Climat and Paris Demain. So you can see that they are trying to make more effort on transparency. Lesson learned from Paris. So the first one is that it takes time. It takes time to develop a framework, to identify the data that you need to do the analysis, how to collect the data, and if you want to extend the scope to either other departments or to other environmental impact. So it takes time, and it is normal that it takes time. It requires cooperation between elected official and staff. So transversality and cooperation is needed. And one benefit that was raised by Paris is that it really helps to raise awareness and commitment from operational departments into the environmental stakes, thanks to the green budget process. So to show you a bit more how the processes was in France and what was the dynamic, so I won't be so long on this slide, but just for you to know that we start with some pilots in 2019 at the communal level first, and then at the regional level in 2021. And we work also with association that represent the elected officials. So the partners were really important here because they help to have an expertise on the methodology and to spread the methodology. And last year we have done a report to know better what were the feedbacks from the local authorities. So last year in France, more than 100 local authorities have done an analysis like green budgeting. It was especially for the regional level, because you can see that almost all regions have done the analysis. And it was also the case for the big cities, because almost a third of them have done also a green budget analysis. From this report, we have make a study, and we have seen that most of them are doing the analysis on mitigation, which is not a surprise, because this is something where we have more data. But we have seen also that local authorities are doing it for other environmental impact and also for social impact. Most of them are doing the analysis on the budget, but they are interested also to do it on a pluriannual investment plan, which is really interesting, and we will develop a bit later with Sebastian. And the main benefit, which is the same as what Paris has say, is that the green budget allows a time, it institutionalize discussions with staff and elected officials on environmental issue into the budgetary process. And it is really a time that is precious to get the environmental question into the budget debate. Another benefit is that it identifies avenue for action. on unfavorable expenditure. And I put a quote here that comes from the Département de l'Essonne, which is not so far from Paris. And she said that using green budgeting in the budget cycle gives the ecological transition a central role. The big news this year is that the Ecological Transition Department will be taking part in every budget conferences. This is a major development, not to say a minor revolution. So this is what we want to say, that the results are less important than the process. In this study, we identify as well some challenges because green budgeting at the moment is not really used as a criteria to change the budget decision, so to be a criteria that change the decision, but the government that are using it want the green budget criteria to be used in the budget decision. And they say that it will change with practice. But because this is new, for the moment, it is not considered as a criteria as they want to use it. And in the study, we identify as well 10 factors of success. First of all, is that to be used in the decision-making process, it has to be integrate into the budget cycle and as close as possible to the trade-off. So this is really similar as with the recommendation from the OECD. Of course, another key factor of success, of course, is that you have to have a high level of portage, so high level administrative and political support to carry out this analysis. Also, it is important to dedicate resources, and especially at the beginning, because as we say, it takes time. And we recommend to have a cross-functional organization with a portage from the environment and finance teams. And I let it to you, Sebastian, for the social analysis and how to integrate them.
Yeah, that's just a glimpse at how it could be additionally used once you have this kind of tagging of the all climate-related expenditure or measures, actually more widely in a budget. We've done this work where we asked, okay, that's great to have climate-related expenditure, but most of them have social impacts, whether they're positive both for climate and for people, which could be the case, as I was mentioning before, like thermal insulation, that's a win-win. But you also have like subsidies, which is usually necessary for social reasons, but could harm the climate if it's fossil fuel subsidies. And you could also have some climate measures that could have strong inequality impacts, like, I don't know, subsidies to electric cars that, if not targeted correctly, would benefit mostly rich households. So the idea was to say, okay, we now know all the measures that have an impact on climate. Let's look for that those who also have an impact on social aspects, whether it be income inequality, poverty, employment, health, or access to basic needs. And that's actually a pretty straightforward analysis to make, since you've reduced your budget to 10% of the measures that used to be there, and you know basically the impacts of most forms of government intervention that is linked to the climate, because that's always a variation around the same 150 measures basically that we've identified in the literature. So very quickly, in 1 or 2 days worth of time, now that the database is here, you're able to pinpoint what are the main hotspots in terms of linking climate and wider social issues in a budget. So that's the kind of that's one example, one application that we've developed and implemented. But that's the kind of additional analysis that these exercises and this understanding of the climate impact of the budget, climate relations of the budget measures allow as well. So this is an example. The numbers here are from an application in Indonesia. We did the same for France, but that's basically always the same now that the methodology has been developed. Working. Okay. And maybe some final words. I'm seeing the time flying, so I'll be quick on this last part. But we wanted to mention that there are limits, obviously, to this kind of exercises. First of all, everything that is not priced as externalities will not be accounted for in a green budget exercise. We are here talking about amounts of money, so we're not talking at all about the efficiency of public spending, which should be again post-analysis to a green budget tagging. Savings in terms of energy saved for energy efficiency measures, for example, are not accounted for. And the stock of natural resources would probably ask for other analytical works to green budgeting. So just to make sure that this is an exercise with a very strict boundary, which is amount in the government's budget. Also, something that is important to mention is that this kind of exercise is a snapshot. It gives you basically that's why the image, it gives you a GPS position of where you stand. It doesn't say where you want to go and through which trajectory. So it has to be complemented with some other exercises. In the case of France, it takes this form. This is the investments in the whole national economy over the years until now that are related to climate action. And once we have these investments, we asked, okay, how much more is needed? So that's basic work to say, okay, we've got this long-term strategy. So we are devising an investment roadmap based on this strategy. And now we are comparing the roadmap to what we are actually investing now. So we know how much is missing. That's not necessarily public money, but that's the whole investment missing to reach the goals we've set in the long-term strategy. So then the next step is, okay, that's not public money. So it could be public money, but we do have a problem right now in France, which is probably more acute at national level in France, but it's happening everywhere. You've got budget constraints. Here you've got on the left-hand side the active, how was the positive, that all the what the state owns, and on the right-hand side all the debts and liabilities that are currently held by the French state. So you're starting to see the issue of the mismatch between the two curves and the two time series of figures. We are trying to act and do much more because we need to invest more with a very strictly constrained budget. So we are left with trying to understand what could I do with my budget. So the first direct option is what we are trying to tag with the green budget is how much I am directly investing as the state in climate-friendly capital. But then there's other public budgets, agencies, first of them, state-owned or government-owned companies, any kind of public-private partnership as well. Then there's these private companies and households that get their money from part of their money, at least an incentive to invest, comes from public budgeting. But also part of it comes through banks and their own resources, actually. So the role of the main government budget is small in the whole picture, but you have to, it's also instrumental in terms of the leverage it can have on different other choices. So that's the simple version. That's the one we drew for France, which is actually a Sankey diagram of all the financing flows for climate here. So on the right hand, you've got everything that is invested by the French economy. On the middle, project owners that would invest, so companies, households, public housing authorities, and then national and local governments investing. And then who's financing these investments? And you'll see here the role of the government and all public entities, actually, government, public banks, national, local governments, public agencies, European funds, and so on, in catalyzing investments from a wide variety of project owners by different means. It could be de-risking, it could be direct participation, it could be co-investment, and so on and so forth. It could be subsidies, grants, loans, and so on. So then the idea is trying to bridge this gap, trying to understand how much is needed, where and when, build this financing gap, this investment gap I've been showing for the case of France at the beginning. Then being able to understand and organize the effort, who is currently investing, who is currently financing these investments, and who should should is a result of a national or a jurisdictional consensus. That's a political choice to be made on, and who will be bearing which part of this burden, public or private companies, households, taxpayers, or consumers, and so on and so forth. And then it's a matter, the question becomes how to unlock these payments. In the case of public action, it's basically where to get the money. Through domestic sources, either from public funds, like in the case of national governments, one main source of funding is national budgets. But if you're already sorry, in the case of local government, one main source of funding is national budget. But if you're already the national level, you don't have this resource. So it could be taxes, shifting expenditure. Could also be external financing, international finance, grants, debt, equity, donors, international financial institutions, and so on. And on the private side, it's more about how to incentivize. The issue is not the volume. Usually, as long as the project is bankable, you will find someone to invest. So it's more about making projects bankable if you want the private sector to invest here. And it could be through public spending, it could be through regulation, which is not exactly bankable, but that's also a way to incentivize very strongly. It could be through taxation, education, research, and so on and so forth. And all of that has also an impact on the public money you're able to spend. So balancing all of these efforts is the next step, is in building this plan. And once you've got this whole financing plan or financing roadmap, then it makes sense to connect to a green budget exercise, because you've got both what you're actually doing and what is your target, and then you're able to compare actual volumes of public spending and where you want to be in a few years' time, or even next year. Moving on quickly on this one, because we don't have that much time left. And these are other, if you want to go more in depth in this part about climate investment planning, we've put here some frameworks. Okay, maybe going back here very quickly, that's interesting, both because it allows you to make the most of a green tagging exercise, but also because these kind of plans are a very good way to attract external and private investments. Being able to display a credible and legit or locally owned financing plans that shows that everything, that, how do you call that? Sorry, I'm missing a word here, but being able to prove that you've got a plan, that it works, that it passes the reality check of financing, is a very good way to attract external finance and private finance. So another approach that I want to comment on, this one developed by the United Nations. And then we've put some links in the presentations for you to go and browse on different resources. These are links more directly related to our work. And I guess this is the end for us. So that leaves us some time for questions that we will be happy to take.